Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Well, I thought a nice place to start might be early internet. I'm interested in your experience. I don't think we're too far apart in age. I think you're a little younger than me. I'm 41. I'm not asking for your age, by the way.
Yeah, I'm 36 now. So
yeah. But I loved in your book, your stories of finding these little microcosms of people who were also interested in the things that you were interested in. And somebody asked me this week, actually, someone asked, what was if you can remember, what was the first thing you searched for when you got the internet? And I think mine might have been WWF pictures. I'm a massive wrestling fan to this day. And I just remember being wowed by these really slow loading, images, really poor quality, but it was just magic. So let's talk about your early internet experience, because it sounds very interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the earliest things I can remember accessing on the internet was really the AOL interface. Like in the US, at least, I don't know about in the UK, how we got online was America Online, and that was the dial-up system that just existed. You would get those compact discs in the mail and then load them up on your computer and go through the shrill dial-up tone and get online. And then what you were faced with once you got online was not like the open internet per se, but was this kind of welcome window of AOL with different banners to go to the kids section or the finance section or the game section. And that was really where I started, I think. I mean, the kids section had its own, little games and puzzles and news, probably with Nickelodeon updates and cartoons and stuff. I remember playing a lot of, basic computer graphic games and going in chat rooms and all of that. But I think gradually I did figure out how to just get onto the rest of the internet, that you could type in a URL or you could find Google and then you could load other stuff. So I think what did I look for? I mean, probably at that point, like video games and anime, basically, like the classic, late 90s, early 2000s internet content. that was a lot of it. I mean, it was all fan forums, right? It was people developing their own little communities around what they were interested in and running it themselves. And I think that's what you end up falling into, is these little groups of people.
Yeah, I think that's where the magic was for me. It was that classic community thing and finding new tribes. And that's, and this touches upon the whole human curation aspect of what you've been writing about. And maybe that was subconscious. It probably was, to be honest. Most things were as a teenager. I don't think we had much of a grasp on anything consciously. But I do remember, yes, loving the images, loving the fact that this stuff was here for me to look at. But who'd done that? Who'd put that there? Who'd written that caption? It all mattered.
Yes. I mean, it was a much more direct person-to-person connection at that point, given that nothing was online unless someone did a lot of work to put it there. So there was no feed per se. There was no, algorithmic recommendation of what you wanted to see. There was just what you could find and what you tried to look up on your own. So that's the forums that you found, or the chat rooms, or the fan websites that collected images of Dragon Ball Z or something. Like, it was much more like a treasure hunt, I think, where you did have to find your way to somewhere new and different. And it was pretty difficult. I mean, the culture of the internet, I think, was not mainstream at that point. And just the experience of talking to people online and participating in those communities was not a universal thing.
Yeah, so there was this an attractive scarcity about it, wasn't there? And you got stories from it too that you could take back into the real world and, pass along.
Yeah, you could share where you got to on the internet. You could
Yeah.
point out a new website to people, or you could connect with your friends on the internet and kind of cultivate this secondary life or connection or relationship with people digitally rather than physically. Yeah. And that, there's always been letters and email and, chat messages. Like, the chat is the most fundamental element of the internet, I feel like. But felt like there was something new, or there has been something new about this like digital or virtual life that you cultivate online, and that you can be whoever you want. In some ways, you can express yourself in a way that you can't in real life. Like, yeah, GeoCities pages, like every artist or every aspiring artist had a GeoCities page of like blurry JPEGs of their paintings. Or, but in the 2000s, there was this genre of forum called Oekaki BBS, which was like bulletin board system. And it was this Japanese thing where people would just draw in the forum on the very basic kind of MS Paint software in the forum, and then post their drawings. And the forum was mostly images. And I spent so much time on this, like making drawings in the forum and posting them and commenting on other people's, like that. I don't think there's any equivalent of that today.
Yeah, because Instagram was cherished by, my industry in particular. We loved that. We loved the aesthetic. We loved that there was less noise there, and it was about imagery. And the moment the moment if you were looking on your phone late at night, you had to worry about hitting the mute button as quickly as possible. That lost a big thing for me. There's a big loss for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the biggest problems of the internet, I think. You can't preserve how something works or what it looks like. So regardless of how you felt about Instagram in 2013 or something, that's never coming back. Like, you're never going to regain that environment. You can't have it just be images anymore. Like, you have to deal with the videos and the advertising and the recommendations. The uses of the platform are always shifting, and what you use it for today is not necessarily what you're going to be using it for in a year or 2 years, let alone 5 years or 10 years. Yeah, you can still find the relics in a way. Like, there are mirrors of GeoCities where you can see what it looked like. And, Tumblr still exists in a not so degraded format. And really, you can post wherever you want online. Like, you can go and have an entire social experience in the comment thread of an obscure blog that no one ever looks at anymore. And that will still be essentially the same as going on Facebook. Like, you can still interact with people in whatever way you want, but the culture has moved on. It's like you need the community, you need the active users in order to make something happen on the internet, and that's hard to do.
What did your cultural horizons look like?
Yeah, I think they were not very wide. I mean, I grew up in suburban Connecticut, kind of in the woods, a little too far from New York City. I had no sense of like a cosmopolitan lifestyle or high culture, let's say, until high school, probably. But where I found the most new things, I mean, one was always the internet for me, having been on it since I was, 10 or 11, probably. I don't even know. But then it was, I mean, the library. Literally, I checked out a history of modern art book from the library that really changed my life because I didn't know about modern art basically. And Blockbuster, really, I think Blockbuster was the unsung hero of everyone's cultural consumption at that time, where you could, there was a Blockbuster in the plaza, a 10-minute drive from my childhood home, next to the big grocery store that we went to. So you could go into the Blockbuster and browse all of the new movies and rent a video game system, like rent an N64, see what games were out in the pre-streaming worlds, like the indie theater, the art house theater, was a gathering place for people who are interested in that kind of culture. And it's the only way you can consume something that's new and obscure and innovative. Like when you don't live in a major city, the internet gave you everything.
It's funny you mentioned Blockbuster. Right? That was my second part-time job. And let me tell you, the social currency that job brought about was incredible. I'd gone from a real bottom end supermarket, like a budget supermarket job, stacking shelves, tidying up, and dealing with eccentrics, which has its own merits, but that's another story. But I then got a gig for twice the money at Blockbusters, and I was one of 7 staff, and we got 7 free rentals a week as part of working there.
Man.
But the best thing was that everyone was friends that worked there. So everyone overrode that and just didn't check it out on the system. So it was kind of unlimited. Not only was it incredibly empowering for us as staff, but then you'd see these people on nights out and they'd be like, oh, it's the guy from Blockbuster, come over here, and it just, there was something about that little community that it created.
Wow. Yeah, you were the town hero kind of, or like you were, it's like the archetypal record store employee, except I feel like Blockbuster was friendlier. Like you kind of couldn't be so pretentious or so mean because it's a Blockbuster. Like you have to get people the big movie that they're looking for. But people trust you. They trust that person who sits at the counter and should know everything about what's in the store and can give you a good romantic comedy recommendation or an action movie and just like guide you to what might be good for you to consume. And I do think, that's how a great bookstore works, or even a great art gallery. Like there should be that human relationship and that sense of human taste to like guide you into trying something new. And I love that, like the heroic quality of that's the Blockbuster guy. Like we all know and trust him to recommend us our new movies. It's like that's a trusted figure in the community. Like that's a role that's very important, and I feel like it's really gone missing as so much IRL exchange of culture has given way to just online consumption and recommendations. I always remember an art history professor of mine at university. I was kind of deciding whether or not to major in art history, which I ultimately didn't. I have a minor in art history, but she said, art history doesn't necessarily change the world. Like this is not politics or whatever, but art history is like what makes life worth living. And so that's why it's so worthwhile. It's not live or die. You're not going to die without it, but everything is kind of empty without that sense of good cultural consumption and like a sense of identification with the culture you consume. Like we develop really strong ties to the things that we love, whether it's movies or fashion or books or music. And I think the internet and like digital streaming platforms has kind of abstracted that away, and removed some of our closeness with that stuff.
I grew up and my dad was very into film memorabilia, still is. And they're not so prevalent now. They're hard to find, but he would go to big conferences and big film fairs. And, the wall of BO when you walked in those places was something else. You know, it was just people who their culture was everything to, you know, to the point of a loss of personal hygiene. And it was, that's the level I want when it comes to my culture.
The
But
obsession.
he was reflecting on that recently, and you know, they're few and far between, and now they're kind of bunged in with comics and Marvel and the big films and everything else. Whereas there used to be, you could get some really nerdy stuff there. I'm talking, you know, negatives from obscure films and all that stuff. But I've always been fascinated and magnetized to those subcultures and those gatherings and those belongings. It doesn't matter what it is. I love seeing other people do their thing too. Do you think that was still prevalent on the early internet? Because it certainly felt to me like it was.
Yeah, I mean, people gathered in smaller, more specific communities, I think. Like the fan forums, even digital storefronts in the early days, like eBay or something. Like there was ways of congregating around a niche interest and building community around it in a very nice way, I think. But at the same time, I mean, I think, I don't know, it makes me think about how at some point the internet provided more of a impetus to bring things offline, to like go meet your internet friends or like go to a conference or whatever. Like the internet was the gateway to a real life experience or an offline relationship in some way. And now it just seems like reality has become more online rather than vice versa. like now that the online experience is the point. Like that's where everything happens and that's where it stays. Anyone who creates things nowadays, whether you're writing or drawing or painting or doing a podcast or posting your comedy sketches on TikTok, like the engagement is almost a threat. Like you are anxiously awaiting the response for whatever it is that you do. I mean, even like I post little drawings of my own on Instagram of like, you know, landscape sketches or whatever. And I'm still like, oh no, this one only got 20 likes when this is so not my thing at all. Like this is something I'm just doing for love and like, you know, a hobby essentially. But you're still encouraged to judge it by how people engage with it on the internet. And I think, I mean, it's so unhealthy in terms of people's creative careers and just the kind of work that they make. I mean, in Filterworld, the book, I interviewed my friend Hallie Bateman, who's a great illustrator and writer. And she talks about how she started this series on her Instagram account of just little kind of self instructions scribbled on construction paper and torn up a bit. Super powerful, visually simple, mimetic pattern. And it did so well on Instagram that she felt like that was the only thing she could do. And she got so many new followers for them who then got mad that she was posting other stuff. like they were annoyed that they weren't just getting the one kind of art that they expected to get on this account. And that's, I mean, so absurd to expect that an artist or a creative person is just going to hit the same note forever, to like keep doing the thing that you like, and that their account will just deliver that ingredient to your feed. It's much more consumerist, I think, like rather than wanting to see what the artist creates, rather than wanting to follow their creative thoughts, you're instead just consuming the product that they have become known for.
I remember the minor backlash to the Arctic Monkeys sort of second and third albums as they started to evolve as a band, because they'd created such a, you know, fierce identity in the first album. It had real currency and voice at the time, and people hated that he wasn't that again. And he's like, well, like you said, it's like, no, come on, I don't want the same. That's beautiful, but I'll always have that album now. That's permanent. That's been made. That's for us. So what's next? You know, I want something exciting and new. And you know, I've always adored the work of Damon Albarn for that reason, because he's just continually evolved and stayed present for, well, you know, cutting edge for 30 odd years.
Right. That's the ideal. Like that's what an art career should be ideally, or if that's what the artist wants, they should keep evolving and keep making new stuff and responding to the era that they're in. Like I think people have this expectation that art stays the same, or that it's just supposed to follow their own tastes and be comfortable for them. And I think, I mean, a larger theory of mine is that people have just turned away from that role of art as challenging. Like they don't want to be challenged by the culture they consume. They would rather just get more generic Spotify recommendations and, float along on the easy path of average stuff than actually seek out a cultural experience that makes them uncomfortable or shocks them or challenges them.
And it is very easy. I've been guilty of it for sure. Spotify is the great example. It's, God, I maybe I'll go out of my comfort zone, and then, it doesn't take too long to come running back to a familiar album. In fairness, I was doing that with my CD collection too, but it certainly heightens and amps up that effect.
I definitely critique that kind of passive consumption in the book, and I don't think it's ideal for consumers or for creators of culture. But you have to ask, why do we seek out this generic, comfortable, average stuff? And that is maybe because we feel so overwhelmed by everything else that we consume. Like, we feel overwhelmed by the accelerated news cycles that we experience. We feel overwhelmed by the chaotic era we seem to live in. We feel overwhelmed by the whirlwind economic conditions that no one understands or predicts. And thus, I mean, who has the energy to be challenged by culture and to have new and different thoughts? Like, all we want to do is rewatch The Office on Netflix or something. I mean, the larger problem to me is that the ecosystem doesn't necessarily reward what's truly innovative. And it's what most often succeeds is the kind of generic and average stuff that stays within a lane. And there's less room for a human curator or tastemaker or just new platform to come in and bring something new for all of us. It's the ecosystem is dominated by monopolistic tech companies. There's less room for that record label executive or librarian or curator to reach out and highlight something that's totally new and different.
Was there a tipping point? Was there a point at which you felt that you were ready to commit to this book?
This is my second book. So writing a book takes a very long time and is like a huge commitment, obviously. So, I mean, as with my first book, but I think before you write the book or before you sell it, particularly in the publishing industry, you kind of have to know that there's enough there. Like there's a certain point at which you think, okay, there's enough here to write an entire book about, to sustain 6 or 8 chapters and 300 pages of stuff. There's more than an article. There's more that I have to say, and more background and more research and everything else. And I think that happens. I mean, it happened mostly. I had been thinking through these ideas since 2015 or 2016, this idea of digital platforms homogenizing culture. And I think by 2019, 2020, I was pretty firmly convinced that this was a real thing. like culture had only seemed to become more homogenous, and our experiences more flattened by the internet in that period of 2016 to 2020. And I mean, I think the internet had also changed a lot. Like, I think in the mid 2010s, we didn't know where things were going necessarily. In 2015, 2016, Facebook still seemed to be kind of utopian. Like, Instagram was only popular since 2 years ago. Like, this was all new and fresh and like a world we were figuring out as we went. And I think by 2019, 2020, it was clear you could make a substantive critique of how the internet had not turned out so well. Like, there were clear problems in what was going on, and there was this growing animosity toward the homogenous, oppressive quality of social networks. TikTok has accelerated all of these problems. If anything, Facebook is more or less irrelevant to most creative people. Twitter has now become X, and under Elon Musk has essentially been broken. So I think what happened has borne out my hypotheses in the book, thankfully. And I never could have predicted the timing, but the timing was great. Like, I think people really started to identify algorithmic recommendations as a problem in a bigger way in the last year or two. And there's this growing sense of dissatisfaction with them.
Andy Sandoz, who was a creative director in the UK, quite a big agency, and I had an interview with him. And I remember him asking me, he was kind of at a loss to explain why. This was in 2015, I think. No, it wasn't. It was 2017. And he said, why now, when we have access to all of human history in some way, shape, or form, are we not seeing wilder acts of creativity? And he said to me, "Where's the banshee whale?" And I think your book has kind of answered his question to me, because we're not having to look for it, and people are not, and people are, in terms of my industry, there's a lot of people talking about the age of convergence, people are calling it. And again, it's this, I saw a brilliant talk by a guy called Max Ottignon, who runs an agency called Ragged Edge. And some of his talk slides, he'd put, e-commerce websites, 30 of them next to each other. You couldn't tell them apart from a logo that was hard to tell apart from their competitors. And it's kind of, he was looking for the optimism, as in, here's an opportunity to do something really cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's less incentive to be original or creative when that doesn't get rewarded. I think in the 90s or 2000s, there was a sense that if a bunch of really interesting people did something totally radical and new, it could survive and could be rewarded, and it wouldn't just be bludgeoned to death by the need to cultivate attention at every second. Like, even thinking back to MTV, even in the 2000s, where's MTV now? Or like, what is our MTV that's bringing us like new and radical culture in a mainstream way? It doesn't exist. Like, that brand identity and that sense of curation and embrace of youth culture is just totally gone. And everything just seems to be so templated, basically. Like, we figured out what forms work on the internet. An efficient, optimized e-commerce storefront, essentially. And then we just stamp that out infinitely. We'd replicate it, and it evolves in slight variations to find an even more optimized version of itself. And I don't know, it's like Darwinian capitalism or something. Like, you're just getting ever closer and closer to the most efficient form of attracting attention and capital. And that is absolutely not the best culture. Like, that's not the most fun or interesting thing. That's just the thing that's going to be most likely to compel you to hit the buy button. You can flip to the next TikTok video. You can fast forward the YouTube. You can close out your tab. But that YouTube of the album demanded a different form of attention from you. And it required more of the user. And I think we should have more required of us. Like, we should have to work for it, rather than just expect that we're going to get personalized and optimized content 24/7.
But it is a two-way relationship, isn't it? Otherwise, why are we creating culture? We do want debate, we do want friction, and we do. That's why I love that. I love that people hate albums that I love. If everybody liked it, I think it would kill it for me. I always remember I remember when Blur brought out Think Tank, the album, and I remember on the same day reading a 1-star and a 5-star review. And that's perfect, because that's what I want. And over time that changes too. But it requires a long-term commitment to reach that place of becoming familiar with something truly familiar, which actually makes me think of a fantastic bit. And was it content capital? Is that the term you used? Tell us about that a little bit, because that was ugly but very interesting.
Yeah, it was a very good term coined by an academic in a book that came out from MIT Press called Content. Just a great book, very distilled message. And content capital was this term for essentially how good you were at generating content. Like, Like, not how good your art was or your music or your writing, but instead how well the content that thing generated performed. So not the thing itself, but the content that it generates. And it's just become such a good lens, I think, with which to look at culture, because so much is driven by how much attention and content you can generate or attract. Now it's like the artist is someone who posts get ready with me videos from their studio every day and like narrates their paintbrush collection and what jewelry they're wearing and what restaurant they're going out to tonight. Like, it's not about the art, it's about the lifestyle and how the lifestyle gets communicated on the internet, which I find depressingly accurate. I mean, everyone, again, who tries to get something made and distributed online faces that pressure to turn themselves into a commodity.
Yeah. I remember Noel Gallagher saying he was angry about it all, and he said I wanted to believe that David Bowie was from Mars. He said I didn't. I had no. He said I had no fucking interest whatsoever in what socks he was wearing or what he was having for breakfast.
Yeah, and that's so much what it's about. The thing that really drives this home for me is you go on TikTok and there are these great artists and musicians and designers doing videos about their work, explaining interesting ideas and talking about, their creative process. And all the comments are just like, where did you get your dress? What is that table? Like, what sunglasses are you wearing? What hotel are you staying at? It's like, that's not the point. That's not the point at all. Who cares? But that's what people are so thirsty to know. What you had for breakfast. Like,
yeah.
What's your gym routine? What's your skincare product of choice? Like,
yeah.
And that's not who was anyone asking David Bowie what moisturizer he used? Like,
yeah.
I hope not. I hope that wasn't happening. I mean, in travel, you also have to seek out the challenging experience. Like, it's so easy now to not be challenged, you can just book the Airbnb or stay in your hotel or go to the Starbucks or go to the, generic fourth wave coffee shop where you can get your iced latte or whatever. And that means you're less exposed to the texture of a specific place. You're not as exposed to the fundamental difference of what is there. And if what you want to do is just consume the same stuff as you were at home, like, why travel in the first place? It's not the new place is not just a new background for your Instagram stories. It's a different culture, it's a different history, it's a place with a different lifestyle that you can participate in. And that is important to experience. I mean, much like it's important to read a challenging book or listen to difficult music, it's important to go to a place and experience it for what it is rather than trying to make it what it's not or stay within your frame of reference.
Serving the expected again. Because that's the big danger of all this, isn't it? What you hit up on there was growth, personal and cultural growth. And if we lose that and if we surrender completely to the expected and live these very surface deep lifestyles, I mean, I don't know how sustainable it is, because at some point, surely we have to sort of wake up and realize that this is not fulfilling and this is not fun and we need more magic in our lives. Or are we that sedated? I don't know.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean,
but that's the thing.
Is a good word for it. We stay with what we're comfortable with. We don't want growth necessarily from the culture. We just want that numbing, continuous consumption, just more and more of the same stuff. But I don't know, like, now personal growth is like going to the gym or like, drinking smoothies for breakfast or something. It's much more the optimization of the self and like the decreasing the friction of life than it is about changing your philosophy or broadening your horizons. I don't know. That's definitely a subject I want to think more about, of like, what is the role of art now and why does it seem like so much is not challenging and not moving us to a new place? Like, we want that experience of being moved by a work of art, of being changed, of having a new feeling like you're a different person after you've seen or heard this thing. And I don't think that happens in the same way when we're just consuming through digital feeds.
I think you're right, and I think it's also tied to the political state of things, and the kind of societal state of play. I think back to the mid-90s and the young British artists movement with Damien Hirst and
Yeah,
Tracy Emin, and just how radical and partisan and dividing that was in the best possible way in what you want art to be. And I remember I interviewed Gary Mansfield, who was a guy who spent 15 years in prison, and he turned his life around in prison by encountering art and writing to the young British artists. And most of them got back to him with their monologues. And so this became his study time in prison. And he just found such belonging in the identity and self-expression that since he's got out, he's just, he's curated all these shows. He does a lot of youth work now with young people to help them find self-expression. Incredible story. But he really made me laugh when he said, I remember saying about Damien Hirst, and he said, I remember seeing the dead cow head piece, and when I was in prison, and he said I remember showing it to the teacher of the art class and saying, "There's a guy in D Wing who's in for something like that."
Yeah. I mean, art can be transgressive in that way. Like the YBAs were shocking and polarizing, and like blew past boundaries, like social boundaries that people expected art to follow. And that's what made them great. That's what makes that work still look, intense and meaningful today. That context, like what it was to be British and young and disaffected in the 90s, like that's what it was. I don't think cancel culture is such a huge phenomenon, but there is this pressure to stay within the lines of political discourse and to not be too personally or politically transgressive. And that prevents some work like the YBAs. I mean, they were problematic people who made problematic art, and that's why it's memorable. There's something about the market and the ecosystem that doesn't deliver it.
Very much so. Well, look, I've kept you for quite a while, Cal. I appreciate it. It's been really, really good. As a sign off, I wanted to just quickly touch upon what kind of conscious actions do you think that I guess both us as creators and us as consumers can start to take to kind of break through this? I mean, I guess the obvious first step is awareness, and I think your book does a wonderfully rounded job of framework for where we are right now. But then, as a launch pad from there, is it working harder to find stuff that's not being given to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think being aware, as you said, it's like understanding when you're being fed something or automatically recommended something by technology that's not necessarily your deepest interest. Like knowing when you're in that, I don't know, black hole of a TikTok feed or a Spotify autoplay and just getting out of it. Like pulling the escape lever when you're in that zone and logging off and doing something else. I think that's a great step. To me, it's hard to discover things. It's hard to find new stuff. Algorithmic recommendations are good for finding new things and getting introduced to new things. But the more important step is what you do afterward. Like when you find a new musician, don't just fave it on Spotify and expect it to come back to you. Learn something about them. Learn what their previous albums were. Go back through their discography. Maybe try to buy the album from them directly so that they can continue their careers. Like take that next step to get closer to the artist and to understand more about where they're coming from. Like that will make the ecosystem better. That will make your experience of the art better. The algorithmic ecosystem online has supplanted so much conversation and person-to-person recommendation about culture that we can also just reclaim that and talk more with each other about what we're enjoying and work harder to introduce our friends to new music or a cool podcast that you listen to or go see a museum exhibition together. I feel like somehow we have that discourse around television and film right now. Like that's very active, but it's much less active in terms of music or art or literature. Like we can all participate in those conversations a lot more than we do already. I keep my metaphor that I keep coming back to for what should happen is like we need a farmer's market of culture rather than the big box Walmart store of culture. Like Spotify is a faceless big box retailer that is not going to bring you more value. It's just there to sell you the most stuff the fastest. But if we think of it more like a farmer's market where we're going directly to the artists, we're paying them directly, we're knowing where our culture comes from and having a direct line to it, I think that would be much healthier. And it's more interesting when you do have that interaction with the artist, when you know where they're coming from, how they're developing their career, like maybe they're geographically closer to you. Maybe you see them in a coffee shop or like go to a pop-up jewelry show at a boutique. Like any movement toward that more human to human ecosystem is going to be infinitely more valuable than clicking on another thing on the internet. This
Yeah.
simply put, go do something, go connect with someone. Go seek out the sources of what you like and everything will be better.